And when Jesus talks about taking up the cross, about death and resurrection, he means foregoing getting it right and giving up what it might mean to make everything work out for me and instead just trust God and love people. And trust that that is the best way to live. And that is Jesus's entire ministry, all of his teachings, all of his miracles, his death and resurrection, wrapped up in those four words. Trust God, be kind.
Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges, as he explores turning the page on his life and yours.
Hi there, and welcome to the next chapter with Charlie. We are in for a special treat today. As you can see, my friend Steve Garnass-Holmes is with me. And, talking to Steve is like talking to a biblical writer. It's like talking to a writer of wisdom literature. He just has so much insight that he has to offer. And today, we are going to begin the show by addressing, well, actually, I changed the beginning, but the beginning was to be, what does it really mean to follow Jesus? Is it a head or is it a heart issue? The heart says to love, while the head becomes laden with thoughts of being right. But there is only one right way to follow Jesus, according to Steve, and I totally agree. And that way is to love. Steve Garnass-Holmes will challenge what you may believe and encourage you with one simple truth. And as we talk to him, let's find out what that is. Steve Garnass-Holmes, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thank you. Great to be here with you.
It's always great. I said, I want our shows that we do here, and as I try to make this, I try to ad-lib more than just reading. So I want our shows to be like our conversations we had yesterday. So when I have conversations with you, I think I want to tape them for the show because those are the dear conversations. But yesterday always also, um, oh, before I get into that, I realize I have one question because that I think our audience needs to know that you are entering older age. And yesterday, you somewhere between shocked and embarrassed me with your physical life, what you do physically. You ski, you ride bicycles, you don't drive your car to the post office, you ride your bicycle to the post office. You're like a mid 20th century American.
Well, I think I'm going to be a late 21st century American when we've burned up all the oil and not so much choosing to live off the grid, but the grid is falling apart because we're overusing it because of the energy that AI takes. All of a sudden, we're going to realize that riding our bikes is a way we can get around.
Unless you live where I live, and then
Yeah,
everything is miles away, and it's all
yeah,
cement.
yeah, yeah. You think of um, even the big cities in Europe, in Amsterdam, in Denmark, and the Netherlands. Everybody rides bike. You look at Russia,
Everybody rides.
150,000 bicycles in one car. It's like,
You better know that when you're walking the streets of Amsterdam.
that's right. Yeah. But they don't have traffic accidents. Nobody complains about parking. There's no pollution. It's a pretty sweet way to live.
Yeah, and unfortunately, what we're talking about right now, we're not going to get to experience it for a while because our president is making enemies of everybody in Europe. People in Europe hate Americans. Don't
Yeah.
come to Europe. Don't come here. We don't want you. And it's like, what happened?
Yeah, it's interesting how the ethos of the bully has totally taken over not only his domestic relationships but our international relationships. He's just swaggering around alienating all of our allies. And the people in Europe don't hate Americans. They hate the president. They're real clear about that.
Are they?
They,
Are they?
yeah,
So what
yeah.
about us visiting? Are we safe visiting? I mean, are
Oh
we
yeah,
okay to visit?
yeah, yeah. Um, there's a famous ad that went around in Canada of a fellow who's checking in, I think, to a hotel, and the person behind the desk asks him some question that has to do with his residence or something, and he sort of apologetically says, "Well, I'm American." And she pushes this little button down behind the counter, and it's like you think it's some sort of security thing, but what it does is it opens up the gate, and she comes out and she gives this guy a big hug, as if to say, "Oh, you poor guy, you have such a terrible president. We feel so sorry for you." I think people around the world get it, that the president does not represent us. He represents his own
I
ego,
hope
and that's
so.
pretty much it.
And as we're moving along here, my viewers and listeners are going to hear this is the first time I've ever done anything that's going to look political on my show at all. First time, decade of doing this. And so all of my Trump bashing that will come out today, I think it's important for people to know that I am Republican. I've always been Republican. But like you said, this transcends party.
You
This
know,
is not about a party.
yeah, I've always thought of myself as a flaming liberal, but in the
Well,
last year, I've come to realize that in a lot of ways, I'm really conservative. I really believe in law and order, and I believe in respect for institutions, and I believe in the slow, gradual change for things. You don't just sort of launch into stuff. You talk about it, you work it out. Um, and all of those things are things that the current administration is against. There, there's no respect for institutions. There's
right.
no respect for law and order. The all those old-fashioned things like the Constitution, they don't matter now. So it's really not a matter of liberal, conservative, Republican, or Democrat. It's entirely a matter of whether you happen to like the president or not. It's very personal. That's the only, I mean, look at his cabinet. The only qualification that anybody on the cabinet has is that they like him.
Well, they're going to agree, or whether they like him or not, they're going to agree with him.
They're going to agree with him.
They're not
That's
going to
all.
publicly disagree with him.
Yeah, yeah. And so they're enormously unqualified. They have no idea what they're doing, but they're loyalists. And that's what we're faced with. It's not a matter of whether you're Republican or Democrat. It's whether you're for the emperor or against the emperor. It's really scary.
Let's give an example because this fits with what you and I were talking about. And this policy here, what I want to do and I'll just read my notes, is that I wanted to begin this part of the conversation with recent news about the Trump administration and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I want to read a brief excerpt from Axios News, which Axios and Free Press are my news sources. I don't read newspapers. I don't, I'm kind of give me the bullet part. I don't read all of the details. And this is what Axios said. Since the start of Donald Trump's second term, we have seen a coordinated effort to erase or rewrite parts of American history, especially Black history and the legacy of the civil rights movement. Here are some things we know. Trump has removed an MLK bust from the Oval Office. And after a sweeping anti-DEI executive order last year, federal departments, including the DEI, paused all activities and events related to MLK Day. And you know what it was replaced with? You know what the holiday is now going to be about?
My birthday, which is
it is like do we not see, can people not see the absurdity of this? It
Right.
has
And
now
it's like,
become the president's birthday. I mean, that is just, if
yeah,
I have to make commentary on it, there's something wrong.
right. If you have to even point it out. Yeah. Yeah. The ego of the bully is just so consistent. So consistent.
Talk to me about, oh my God, do I really want to go here? Listen to my question. I'm thinking, do I really want to go there? This is, but
We can talk
I,
about it,
I,
and
I,
then
I started it, so let's just go on a little bit.
you can always edit it out.
Just a little, no, I don't do any editing. I mean, I don't do content editing. Whatever you say is going to be on air. Don't worry.
It'll be out there. Watch out.
Yeah, yeah. But talk to me about the bully. What is this? What is this? Why are you, that term? I don't hear that term a lot, yet I think that term is really appropriate.
Well, think about the average schoolyard bully. Um, is sort of the stereotypical um, guy who has a chip on his shoulder, and it's never quite sure what it's about. It's not like it's around an issue. It's just that he really wants to feel that everybody else is afraid of him or admires him, and he enforces that, and he gets a kick out of picking on people who are weaker than him. Um, I I think pretty consistently you can see that in our president, the way his entire platform is retribution, and he says that he's pretty clear about it. He's sending ICE to the states of people whose governors or whose senators voted against him or ran against him. It's all
Yeah.
retribution. It has nothing to do with any principle, and it's rooted in this desire to dominate. And it really strikes me how um, if you want to light some fires, here's a fire. I think Donald Trump perfectly embodies the Antichrist. Everything that Jesus ever said or did, Trump is against. He, Jesus said, "You shall not lord it over other people, but be humble." Oh my gosh, talk about lording it over. That's all Trump does. Forgiveness and healing. Nope, nope. He's against that. Um, the 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 constant, consistent prophetic message that God looks out for the poor and the powerless and the outsiders and the marginalized. No way. No. Trump is all about the billionaires and the millionaires. Just consistently, everything that Jesus is for, Trump is against. It's it's amazing how anti-Christ Trump is.
Well,
And
let's
and
do this. Let's do this, Steve. Let's take what Jesus was for
mhm.
and let's talk about that and then remind me to evaluate at the end, where is our country in light of this?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, I just read, I have never heard, we're going to talk about the mission of Jesus and what he means to follow me. And that you brought that up yesterday to me, and I think
Mhm.
that's a powerful concept to go with. But now, I have read several articles or several authors say that Jesus' message to his hometown in Nazareth, they're calling that the mission of Jesus. That is the mission of Jesus. And I don't know how true that is, but I know it certainly represents what he does. And his reading from Isaiah simply says to bring good news to the poor, proclaim freedom to the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, release the oppressed, and announce the year of the Lord's favor.
And
Um,
significantly, he puts a period right there. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, period. If you read Isaiah that he's quoting, he leaves out the next phrase, which is, and to declare the time of God's vengeance. Jesus specifically omits that. There is no vengeance, only favor. Isn't that interesting?
that's fascinating. What do you make of that?
Well, as I talked yesterday, um, this is my one sermon that I'm always preaching. There are two religions in the world, and everybody is always practicing one or the other. Of every religion or no religion, one is the religion of being right. You figure out the formula for how the universe works, and then you play the game according to the rules that you've figured out so that it turns out as well as it can for you. You do your best to get it right. And in Christian setting, what that means is you follow the laws of God and then you go to heaven. And if you mess up, then you get punished. It's all about rewards and punishment, so get it right. The other religion is the religion of being in love. You are so smitten by the wonder of this life and the grace of God that you're in love. And in that joy and gratitude, you pass on that love to everybody you can. Now, the difference between those two is pretty stark. Sooner or later, if you follow all the rules, you're going to hurt somebody. If you love everybody, sooner or later, you're going to break a rule. You can't have both. And Jesus was clear that both of those religions are woven throughout the Hebrew faith. The Jewish faith is full of that. What the Hebrew Bible is full of that. So you'll see these declarations that God is forgiving to the seventh generation and that God punishes. And they're both in there. And Jesus asks us to choose one or the other. And he's always doing things like quoting Hosea 6:6, in which God says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I don't care if you get all the sacrifices right. I just want you to love people. And Jesus is real clear about our temptation. The natural instinct of the ego is to get things right and to make everything work out for me the way I want it to work out. And when Jesus talks about taking up the cross, about death and resurrection, he means foregoing getting it right and giving up what it might mean to make everything work out for me and instead just trust God and love people. And trust that that is the best way to live. And that is Jesus's entire ministry, all of his teachings, all of his miracles, his death and the resurrection, wrapped up in those four words: trust God, be kind. And you can see the tension between that way of living and a way that's much more rule-oriented and therefore becomes doctrinal, that these are the things you have to believe, that struggle that shows up throughout Christian history. It's there in the New Testament. You can see those two energies fighting against each other. And this gets to what we were talking about yesterday about faith and what it is. A lot of people talk about having the Christian faith. And early on in the scriptures, when people used that word, what you can see they were talking about is having faith in Jesus. And then after a while, it became having the faith, which is not a relationship, but a set of beliefs, a set of opinions that you can either believe and get right or not believe and get wrong. And so that tension is even woven through our Christian history. And it's still on us to make that choice, to choose to act in total trust of God's grace and to love everybody, as opposed to figuring out the rules, figuring out what I'm supposed to believe and believing that, figuring out what the stuff is that I have to do, what the boxes that I have to check off in order for my own benefit. And for most people, that's that you die and go to heaven. And Jesus basically says, heaven is when you love people. It's not later. It's living the world of love. If you enter into that love of all people, that's what it means to enter the kingdom of God.
Yeah, you pointed out yesterday something. You made a distinction between following the faith of Jesus, which requires action. That is a very action-oriented sort of faith.
Yeah.
But we've concocted this faith in Jesus, which really comes to me not a lot more than a personal opinion.
Right.
And it's a, I have to go back to my baby Greek to remember the way that it is written could be translated of or in. It's just it's rather arbitrary to the translator, and the translator must contextualize,
Sure.
in my mind, what is going on in the whole text, is to say, is it faith of and faith in? And the text seems to ask me to follow the faith of Jesus, not the faith in Jesus.
Yeah.
And that if we were to follow Jesus, what did he mean? Did Jesus ever ask people to believe in me?
Well, he in the Gospel of John, he does. And one of the things that's so helpful to remember is that there are four Jesuses. The first Jesus is the historical Jesus, this guy who actually lived 2,000 years ago, and he said certain things and did certain things. Then there's the Jesus that people talked about after he died. He was still the same old Jesus, but now they had some stories about him, and they put some spins on those stories about Jesus that end up in the Gospels. And the Jesus of the Gospels is not the historical Jesus. There are things that Jesus says and does in the Gospels that we don't necessarily believe, but they are things that we believe about Jesus. You can go into a lot of churches, for instance, that have a stained glass window with a picture of Jesus with a halo around his head, and he's holding a little lamb. I guarantee you Jesus didn't have a halo. And I bet Jesus didn't pick up a lot of lambs. He was a builder, but not a shepherd. But that stained glass window is a representation of the Jesus we believe in. He's the Son of God, so there's a halo because he's holy, and he's the Good Shepherd. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's who the historical Jesus was, but that's the Jesus of the Gospels. There's a third Jesus, which is the Jesus of the church. And that Jesus, for instance, is the second person of the Trinity. Jesus never said he was the second person of the Trinity. The Trinity wasn't even invented until after the New Testament was written. But there are things like that the church maintains about Jesus. And they're rooted in that historical Jesus, but it's not exactly the same Jesus. And then there's a fourth Jesus. And the fourth Jesus is my Jesus, the Jesus that I have a relationship with. And my Jesus, for instance, speaks English. Well, for most of the world, Jesus speaks Portuguese, right? Or Zulu, or Mandarin, or something other than English.
Or Persian.
Yeah.
Like where he was from.
Yeah. Aramaic. So when we talk about Jesus saying, believe in me, I can accept all of those things that are in the stained glass window and the things that are in the New Testament that are ways that I think about Jesus. And like you say, they're basically just opinions. That Jesus is the Good Shepherd is a metaphor. It's a very rich bit of poetry. But what it means to believe in Jesus is to allow myself to be the sheep that he leads, to allow myself to actually get picked up and carried and put in the flock. When Jesus encounters the disciples in those stories in the lakeshore, when he comes up to the fishermen and he says, "Follow me," none of them say, "I believe you are the Son of God," and sit down in their boat. They drop their nets and they go with him. And I think that's the tension that you're talking about between believing in stuff about Jesus rather than following as a companion of Jesus. And rather than my faith being faith in Jesus, that I think he's the Son of God, I think this and think that about him, I have the same faith that he had, that God is graceful and powerful, and that I can absolutely trust God and absolutely love people. And I will trust that. I will leave the boat and go with him. That's what it means to believe. In the same way that when you see a rickety looking little rope bridge over a deep chasm, you can have some understandings about physics and engineering, and you can decide whether or not you think that bridge will hold. None of that is faith. Faith is when you step out on the ding-dang bridge. And I think that's what Jesus means when he says to believe. Our English word believe, is rooted in Old English and ultimately Germanic, belieben, which means to love, to give your heart to. And I think that's what Jesus means by believe, not
Ooh,
just
I like that. I like that. That's German.
yeah, yeah. Don't just think some things about Jesus, but give your heart to Jesus. Be in a relationship. Jesus frequently says to people that he's healed, your faith has made you well. There's a woman who comes up to him in the crowd, and she's had this bleeding for years, and nobody could heal it. And she reaches out and touches the hem of his garment, probably the fringe of his prayer shawl, and she's healed. And Jesus turns around and says, wait, who touched me? And at first she's like, oh, now I'm in trouble, because she knows she's ritually unclean. But she comes forth and says, it was me. And he says two really remarkable things. One is daughter of Abraham. He gives her this honorific title. He doesn't even know her. And the second one is that he says, your faith has made you well. Now, he doesn't know anything about her religious beliefs. What he does know, the only thing he knows, is that she reached out to him. And there's two parts to that reaching out. One is trust. She reached out trusting that something good would happen and she wouldn't get in trouble. She was willing to take that risk. But she also reached out. She made connection. And for me, faith is reaching out. It's establishing a connection based on trust without necessarily knowing the outcome, but just trusting, I believe this is going to be okay. I'm going to trust this bridge. It's kind of like I've tried really consistently to communicate in lots of different ways to our three sons, I believe in you. And I think that's what it means to believe in Jesus. Not necessarily I have some opinions about whether or not you are the Son of God, but who you are, I trust. And I think that's a different kind of believing than just having some doctrinal notions. It's an action of trust and connection.
Well, the doctrinal connections, as you know, but I don't know if how many of our listeners know, but it was, at least 3 centuries of debate to determine that Jesus was divine.
Yeah, and they came up with
what we just take for granted, oh yeah, he's God. Well, no. The early church did not quite. It took them 3. The debate started in the 1st century, and I guess formally ended in the 3rd century. But there were remnants of it that continued on.
Sure. And I think consistently Jesus made it clear that he didn't much care what you thought. What he cared is how you love people. He was quite open to the faith of a Roman centurion or of people who were not even Jewish because of their faith, their willingness to reach out in trust. And I think it was real clear to him that he didn't insist that everybody be Jewish. He just wanted everybody to be loving.
Yeah, he wasn't forming a religion.
Right. He was Jewish and he just wanted people to be really good Jews. And he said, here's what it means to be Jewish. Love your neighbor. Love, he always hearkened back to the scripture and the law of God. He was rooted in scriptures and rooted in the temple. It's not like he wanted to destroy that stuff. And they asked him, so It was almost like a parlor game, not quite a trick question, but sort of like, who's your favorite? Who do you think the greatest rock singer ever was? And you can all debate that. Well, they would do that about the commandments of God because there's 613 of them, and they argued about all that stuff. And you notice how Jesus, when people asked Jesus questions that were either direct or implied, like 113 times in the Gospels. And 111 of those times, he responds with another question or with a story that doesn't seem to be about what they asked
Right.
about, or he turns,
Really. Look at your data. You what a data-driven guy.
yeah, he was just always
I didn't
messing
know
with
that.
people,
111
except,
out of 113.
except when somebody said, what do you think is the most important commandment? What's the greatest commandment? And that was a common question, and rabbis would debate about that for hours. And all of a sudden, Jesus is not telling any parables. He's not playing any tricks. He says, here it is. Love God with all your heart and mind and soul and strength. And here's the flip side of it. There's another one that's the back side of that, and that is love your neighbor. He's real clear about that. And he's rooted in that really Jewish understanding of how you live. And he doesn't care if you've sacrificed the right sheep. What he cares about is that you love God and love your neighbor.
And that brings us back to I'm going to make I can't believe I'm going to make a political transition to go talk about politics again. But that brings us back to the bully.
Sure.
And a bully is not about love.
You know, it's interesting to think of Jesus's ministry in the context of Roman occupation.
Right.
We
Okay.
we forget that. We sort of think that Jesus went around telling all of his fellow Jews that they should be nice people, and his followers went around telling people all over the Mediterranean that they should all be nice people. And what we forget is that they got crucified by the hundreds for being Christian. And crucifixion was a punishment that was a Roman punishment reserved for people who were enemies of the state. And when you think of that context, for Jesus to say, take up your cross and follow me, really means be willing to be loving and trusting in a hostile environment in which you're going to have to sacrifice for the sake of love. And his consistent love and nonviolence in the face of Herod and Pilate and Caesar and the apparatus of Roman oppression is very relevant to what we're going through today. That we have to make some choices about love and nonviolence, surrounded by people who will, like Herod, slaughter whoever they want to slaughter in order to keep their power. And we haven't quite gotten to slaughter, although a few people have been slaughtered. You know, when a mother gets shot in her car in the face because some guy's pissed at her, that's slaughter. I would call that slaughter. And there haven't been hundreds and hundreds yet, but there have been dozens and dozens of people who have been shot and thousands of people who have been arrested and detained and deported. So there's some real brutality going on. There's some real Gestapo energy out there on the streets, choosing to be gentle and loving and courageous in that kind of environment. That's what Jesus was talking about. That this is what he was training us for, to go out there like sheep among wolves, like protesters in the face of ice.
Sheep among wolves is protesters in the face of ice. I like that. It's unfortunate that the protesters get violent.
Right,
That screws up the whole message. But
well,
but
and
then
that's
those are I read a lot that said those are also instigators, that they are not so much the protesters. They are people
well,
that come in that are looking for this sort of thing.
sure. All it takes is one person to throw a brick, and you got trouble. But that's part of what Trump and Kristi Noem are counting on. If we send in enough thugs, it will get ugly. And so they're fomenting violence. Everybody's singing Kumbaya till ICE shows up, and then there's trouble. And what they know is that if they keep pushing that, sooner or later, there will be violence, and then they can use that violence as an excuse for more oppression. And
Dominant control. Yeah.
yeah, it's right out of the Nazi playbook. It's all been done before. It's very familiar to anybody who was in Germany in the 1930s. They've seen it happen.
There's not much, unfortunately, we don't have any of those left, just because it's so long ago. And,
Those
you know,
living witnesses of that, yeah, that was
right.
100 years ago.
Yeah. Was it 100 years ago?
Well, it was 90. It was in the mid 30s that Hitler was rising to power, got elected, saying that he was going to make Germany great again, and figured out who
Yeah.
we could blame it on. Very, very similar tactics. Got cleaned out the government, filled it with loyalists who would agree with him no matter what he did. Yeah.
So what kind of sacrifices, I don't feel I have to make a lot of sacrifices. Is that because I'm choosing a life of turtle in the shell?
Yeah, partly. I struggle with that. It's not like all of us need to go out and, you know, die on the barricades. Um, I think a lot of what it is the willingness to not just be in charity, but solidarity with people who are endangered. Again, one of the things that Jesus made really clear and modeled for us is not just that he thought that God cares for the poor. Jesus spent time with the poor. Yeah, when he was put on trial by the Sanhedrin, they made up all sorts of bullshit about him. But the one thing that actually was true and that stuck was when they said he eats with sinners. Absolutely. Jesus broke down those hierarchies. And then he put himself at the same risk as the people who were already being judged. In his case, it was the lepers and the prostitutes and the people who weren't Jewish. In our case, primarily right now, it's the immigrants. And the challenge that I think Jesus offers us is not just to be in charity toward them, but to be in solidarity with them. And that will take some sacrifice. That will take some risk because you can get arrested, you can get shot, you could get detained, even if you're a white male American citizen like me. And I think that's where it's not necessarily that we have to do that, but we have to live in that spirit of solidarity with them and know that every immigrant that's hauled away is my child. That's happening to me. We have to stop saying, well, at least it's happening to those guys and not to me. And I think that's, Jesus says in that parable, whatever you've done to the least of these, you have done to me. And that's partly God saying, when you're cruel to other people, that's your worship, folks. That's how you care about God. But it's also modeling how we care for one another. That when we act in compassion with others, it's not just charity that I have stuff that you need, so I'm gonna give it to you and I'm gonna be your rescuer, but I'm gonna be in solidarity with you because we are actually of the same life. We are, what happens to you happens to me. We're in quantum entanglement in this universe, and I don't separate myself. And I think part of our privilege, certainly part of my privilege as a white, straight, Christian, well-to-do male, I've got it all going for me. Part of my privilege is that I can separate myself and say, well, it's too bad it's happening to those people, but it's not going to happen to me. When I live with such radical trust in the grace of God that I am willing at any moment to take a big risk for the sake of people that I could disassociate myself from, then I'm getting closer to what it means to take up the cross. I don't think that's a guilt trip, and I think I could live here in the woods in Maine pretty safe, and ice
Yeah.
will not invade my neighborhood. Although they're coming to Portland, 20 miles away. So got neighbors who are about to be deported. Um, but I could choose to remove myself, or I could get involved and speak out and lend my voice and risk whatever cost that might take.
I guess I've elected, I don't know about the sacrifice that I make. I don't feel like I make sacrifices, but I feel like my life, in many ways, my Christian life is lived amongst the poor. I,
Mm.
I, two charities that I've been involved in, and it's more than just writing checks. I've been a part of
Mm.
a part of the hands-on ministry. One was we built water wells in Uganda. And
Oh,
so I
cool.
would go to Uganda 2 to 3 times a year. And I was either with the team, which were all they were all nationals. There was one expat, the leader was from Romania or is from Romania, and everybody else was Ugandan. And so that is the team that I got a hold of and that I became
Mm.
part of, and I became solidarity with that team.
Yeah.
And I would go to villages where we were supplying water, and the community I learned so much. You talk about the happiness of the poor compared to the happiness of the rich, and the happiness of the poor is much wealthier than the happiness of the rich.
So much
Uh,
deeper. Yeah.
and because it's all about each other. It's not about
Hmm.
any individual. It's about each other. And if I have something, I'm going to share it with my neighbor. And then the other charity that I belong in deals with we deal with in a couple of three or two of our officially two of our local communities. We deal with most of the immigrant population in cities called their names are Anaheim and Fullerton, and we deal with children, with families, and we work with them. We have hands-on work with them, and those are because I was raised. I had a discussion with the group the other day. Since I was raised as an abandoned or rejected child,
Mm.
I was raised displaced. I didn't start out with a place and then I was displaced later. I had no place to begin with.
Wow.
And then I found a place in adoption. Um, but it nevertheless took me 30 years to even begin to overcome that.
Sure.
And I find that what is really helpful to me, Steve, and so that's why it's not sacrifice, is I so identify with the abandoned and the rejected and the oppressed.
Hmm.
I just
Hmm.
identify they're my people. That is who I
Yeah.
am. So when I see or feel the oppressed, I see and feel their oppression. And
Hmm.
and it doesn't even go. It's not even a logical. There's nothing logical about it. It is all emotional. It is all, and I don't even know if emotion is the right word. It is just all essence. It's all feeling toward these people. So sometimes I hear about sacrifice and I say, I don't know that, I've got money and I give money. I don't, I'm not rich, but I'm like you. I'm a well-to-do white man living in the Orange County bubble in the comfort of the most comfortable
Hmm.
place we can live, apart from where you live, and you live idyllic. You live in the garden.
Suburb of hell, heaven.
It is a suburb of heaven, and I'm in a suburb of hell.
Right.
But that's why
Mhm.
sometimes the word sacrifice, I don't feel it's sacrifice. I just feel it's what I am, and it's who I
Yeah,
do and what I do.
I think that's important. Again, the notion of sacrifice can feel like a particular thing you're supposed to do and do right. Um, and I think like you're getting at, it's not a matter of doing the right thing, but clarifying our identity. And you identify with those people who are marginalized because you know that in your own experience. And part of part of what surrounds what we struggle with around privilege when we talk about racism and white supremacy and privilege. And I think, well, I'm not necessarily privileged. Um, I don't have to identify with suffering. And that's a kind of privilege. It's kind of shelter.
Thank you.
And part of what it means for me to be in solidarity is to say that privilege of mine is an illusion, that that I am equally likely to be abandoned and rejected as soon as I say something that other people don't agree with. So I go along with them. If I were to have been born with a different colored skin, I would have been more rejected than I am. And rather than buy into that, that privilege, that protection, I buy into the solidarity and say, I am one with those people who are being rejected and marginalized. That's me. Those are my people. I identify with them. And it takes a lot to overcome that sense that I don't identify with them and I don't have to. I'm so immersed in my white middle class safe life that's hard for me to imagine living with the kind of fear that somebody who's been traumatized has to live with. Somebody who's been uh, assaulted or abused as a child that lives in that sort of hypervigilant state. I don't have to, I can get away with not identifying with that. And to me, the sacrifice is not that I go out and do some brave thing, but I learn to set aside my sense that that's their problem and not mine. That suffering doesn't actually affect me, and to set aside my privilege means to open myself to that suffering and take it in and take it seriously as mine, as Martin Luther King said, and it's been said in other places too, that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. That injustice that affects somebody else out there affects me. And it seems like the primary temptation that's, again, to make reference to the political situation, that's in our political world, but it's also in our spiritual world. The primary temptation is the temptation to think that your pain is yours and I don't have to deal with it. And compassion is the act of saying, I am hurt by your suffering. And I care about your suffering because it's part of who I am. It's a part of my reality, my being.
That's really helpful, man. Um, but it and I don't know how to comment. I'm just, although you're making me think, do I need to make, what do you think? Do I need to have talks like this more on my show rather than personal development and all that stuff I'm getting bored with?
Well, if you're getting bored with, maybe you should do less of it. You know, um, I think part of, again, to get back to that notion of following Jesus, uh, if we imagine this scene in which Jesus is standing on the lakeshore and he says to the disciples, "Follow me," and the scriptures, in a couple different versions of it, indicate that they immediately left their nets. They just dropped the stuff that was in their hands and followed Jesus. And if we imagine that as a real historical moment, I can imagine the fishermen looking at each other and thinking, "Follow him where? Where's he going? What's going to happen
Well,
next?"
they ask him that. They ask him, "Where are you going?"
Yeah.
And he,
And and there's that little moment where they say to themselves, "Will I follow him even if I don't know where this goes? I trust him, so yes." and they make that choice and they get up and go. And I think, you know, thinking about the kind of talks to have on your show, or what we do next as a compassionate act, whether it's in our personal lives or in the political world, there's, I think, the next step is always revealed to us, but never more than that. You know, the invitation is to the next step. And again, that's where our faith comes in. Do I trust Jesus to lead me in a way in which I can't see where the road is going? All I can see is this next step. I will follow him today. I will do this. I will have this conversation. I will ask this question. I will engage in this activity. And I don't actually know where that's going to lead me, but I'll trust Jesus and go with it. I'll follow. And that's a way of living that's very different from this world that asks us to plan out our financial future and take steps to build your career and all these different ways of providing for ourselves, none of which are relevant to the work of actually following where Jesus in the Spirit asks us to go right now, next. And it's an
So
adventure.
let me ask you this. So let's get practical, because we've been kind of theological, a little philosophical. What are your next steps? You know, if you have it, do you have it, not next steps, just do you have a next step in this journey of following Jesus?
You know, a couple of them. There are things that I feel called to continue to do. You know, it doesn't feel like so much a next step as keep on going with my writing poetry and just in general the way I treat people. And those are conscious things. I mean, like when people ask me, sometimes when people say, "So what do you do?" You know what they mean is what's your job?
Oh, I
And
know.
sometimes I will tell them I'm a retired Methodist minister. And sometimes I'll say, "What do I do?" "I write poetry. I ski in the woods. I write," and they say, "No, no, I mean, what do you do?" And I say, "I try to spread light in every relationship, whether it's my friends or a stranger at the store, so that people walk away having been blessed." That's what I do. That's my vocation. So there are things like that that I feel like I will keep taking those steps. But two specific things that occur to me. One is that right now, given our political situation, I think one of my next steps is to keep being real vocal about what it means to follow Jesus in an atmosphere of power and fear and retribution, and just keep talking about that and keep inviting people to think about that. And interestingly enough, a second step that occurs to me is to be more and more conscious of serving my wife, being there for her. As we age and our needs both change and also intensify, they deepen. I am pretty sure I'm going to spend more time giving care to Beth, and I think that's where God's calling me. That's part of my next step. Okay, that's my job. I'll do that. That's good.
You know, that's interesting, because you know, I can identify with what you're saying, because I don't know if we talked about it or not. I think we probably did. We talked about everything else, but I did. I don't do New Year's resolutions.
Mm,
I do themes. I do,
mm,
and then, you know, it's a theme for me to follow, because I'm a big picture guy. I'm not a detail oriented guy. You know, I make lists and lose them. You know, I don't, but I do not lose thoughts and direction.
mm,
And so my theme, I had one theme, and then I forgot, oh, I've had another theme that I'm actually living day to day. So I need to say I've got two themes. And so my theme I've really been working on for the last couple of years is to daily experience wonder, to be open to the wonder of creation and open to the wonder of God and the wonder of life and the beauty and that's why I travel. I travel for wonder. I travel to find wonder. It said
Hmm.
is that I heard a quote when we were just traveling and we were in Asia for a while, and said, "I no longer go on vacations to sightsee, but I go on pilgrimages to experience wonder." And
Yeah.
so they're the same thing. They're the same week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, month, whatever I'm gone. It's not to sightsee. I'm a terrible sightseer. Don't you want don't go to a city with me. If you want to see the Eiffel Tower, I've seen it and I've seen other things like it. I'm not going to even, I don't want to see the Eiffel Tower or another one even similar. It doesn't do anything to me. I want to walk in the streets and feel the people and experience the people. And so those are elements of wonder to me. But you know what the other big word is in my life? And I want to leave a legacy. I want to leave one legacy. I want to die with one legacy. And the legacy is that of loving kindness.
Hmm.
Um, um, so I call it kindness, but it is loving kindness. And the
Yeah.
beauty of kindness is this, Steve, is that it is replicable, and
Yep.
it is something that I will never ever be known after I die. People will not be kind because they say we learned this from Charlie.
Right.
You know, so my name will have nothing to do with it, and that is fine with me. But if I leave a legacy by being kind to someone, and that sort of
It's a virus.
incites them, it is a virus that incites them to be
Yeah.
kind to other people, and
Yeah.
kindness spread. Then I've led a, you know, then I've lived a life of kindness. So
You
those
got
fit in. Those are my things, and they're not sacrifices. They're far
right.
from sacrifices. They're lovely. They're wonderful things to do. But I feel like I'm following Jesus in doing this.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
You know, when we talk about the call to love your neighbor, it
Right.
sometimes feels a little enormous because love feels so romantic, or it feels like we're required to have certain feelings. And I think what Jesus meant by love is basically kindness. Basically, just be kind to people. You see what they need, you're there for them. You shed light in their lives. And I think kindness is sort of undervalued because it doesn't sound as powerful as love, and certainly not heroic. But when it comes right down to it, it's simply the act of kindness that changes people's hearts, and that give when you give somebody kindness, they have it, and they will give it. And there are some people who need a lot of kindness to stop being such jerks, but they're not going to stop being jerks any other way than being given grace and mercy and kindness. It's powerful stuff.
Well, let's maybe I see we're almost an hour. That's usually my show. It is 45 minutes to an hour.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think we've ended on a wonderful note. Um, so many things you've said that I want to continue. Your faith of and faith in, I think, is very powerful, and your life story is powerful. But to end, sacrifice is solidarity. It's identifying with other people. It's identifying with the state of other people and the broken state, and and that love and loving kindness is the answer, or is an answer.
Yeah. Oh, I would even say the answer. I'm I'm a big believer in love. Yeah, and it's not like I say, it's not charity. It's not that I'm giving somebody else something that they need. It's what I need. I am not whole until I am one with the other people that I am one with. It's what to me it means to be the part of the body of Christ. we all have our part and we all belong, and I am not whole unless everybody in the body is whole with me, and I'm always seeking that wholeness. And that's where the power comes from. It comes from the wholeness, not from the individual pieces.
I have so many comments, but I'm going to wrap up with that because there's just, I was going to take us down another path that we would have been
We could go on
another
and on
hour.
and on and on.
Yeah. Yeah, we could go on for forever. Steve Garnass-Holmes, it's such a joy talking to you.
No, it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun, but it is so rich, and I think it's wonderful. I think our people just treasure times when I'm going to have a show with Steve.
Good.
Okay, bro.
All right.
So, I want to thank everybody. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.